If you listen to our episode of Mating Matters called Survival of the Gayest, you probably heard that depending on environmental pressures, most humans are wired for any kind of sexual orientation. That's because in our species, sex isn't just for reproduction. It's used for bonding, stress reduction, pleasure, as an exchange of care or currency, and even as a way to social climb. And all these things are related to survival. But why is America becoming so gay all of a sudden? And how has that impacted dating, mating, and relating? Welcome to Mating Matters, the podcast that looks at human behavior through a lens of evolutionary psychology and human mating strategy. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. You know, today in America, we've become perhaps the gayest ever, and we're becoming more gay by the generation. According to a 2021 Gallup poll published in the Washington Post, a record number of U.S. adults identify as LGBTQ. That number? 7.1%. Now, you got to understand, this is more than double the percentage of adults who self-identified as LGBTQ back in 2012. That's when Gallup first started measuring sexual orientation. But get this, in just 1 year, from 2020 to 2021, the percentage of LGBTQ identifying adults increased from 5.6% to 7.1%. In 1 year. That's a fast clip of change. But the story gets even more interesting when you break that 7.1% down by generations. Among millennials now these days are aged 26 to 41, 10.5% self-identify as LGBTQ. You get older, and that number drops. Only 4.2% of Generation X, those are ages 42 to 57, and only 2.6% of baby boomers. I should also add that nearly 87% of all people who responded to the Gallup poll study said that they were straight or homosexual. But the record high, drum roll please. The record high is 21%. That score goes to Gen Zers who are now adults. They were born between 1997 and 2003. Now let's stop for a minute and think about that. Slightly more than 1 in 5 people aged 18 to 25 in the U.S. identify as LGBTQ. So what's going on? And how has that impacted human mating? It's time for me to bring in an expert because I don't have all the answers. I need more brains to figure this out. I'd like to welcome Dr. Leslie Solis. Did I say it right? I'm trying. She is a Latinx bilingual licensed clinical psychologist in Los Angeles, co-host of the podcast, My Therapist Friends. Welcome, Dr. Solis.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You are surprisingly shy for somebody with a podcast. So, as I introduce you, it is 2022. Part of the introduction is I have to say, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are she, her, they, them.
Okay, so help me understand this. She, her, and they, them.
Yes.
How would it be used grammatically?
So for myself, I believe that I feel comfortable with anybody using she, her, or they, them pronouns for me personally. I identify as non-binary. That is why I use more than one set of pronouns. However, people who may identify as non-binary don't always do that. So for me personally, that's how I identify.
And so those who are not, this is not a visual medium, this is audio. When they hear the word non-binary, when I hear that word, I think that the gender expression, the presentation of gender is going to be very androgynous, but you don't present that way. Yet you can still be non-binary. Can you explain that?
Yes, absolutely. So, what makes someone non-binary is how they identify themselves. What makes someone non-binary is not whether they are on androgynous, whether they present a certain way physically. It really is how they feel about their own personal experience of gender.
And so that people can understand, there's a world of difference between non-binary and trans.
Yes.
Explain.
So, people who are non binary may feel, for example, that they maybe don't identify with being a woman or a man, maybe somewhere in between, maybe none at all. People who land on the trans spectrum might identify more with one or the other, or something in between as well. And that can be both how they express themselves physically, how they look, or not. It totally just depends on the person and how they feel and how they see themselves in the world.
I've always felt that gender is a cultural construct anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been seeing so much cultural change in the last decade. You know, I think in terms of evolutionary psychology. And when I think about our evolution, I think about how we moved from hunter-gatherers to farming to the Industrial Revolution. And then we marched right into the information age, where for the first time in a long time, women are able to fairly extract resources from the environment in the same way that men can. In other words, in the information age, the skills that are needed are communication, typing and texting, which we're really good at. Talking, we're really good at that, right? And so women can make money in investment banking. They can make money flying jets. They can make money as police officers, as doctors, as lawyers. Now, this is not to ever dispel the idea that women are on equal pay with men, but it's starting to dilute the idea that if our gender roles, what we do, have become blurry, that's a welcome fact, then also our self-identity might be blurry. So tell me how you think that's connected, like the fact that women can extract resources as well as men, so why subscribe to one gender or another? Think it's impacted it?
Well, I think I'd like to think about it within the context of society, because really the gender and sex binary is something that's actually relatively new within the last couple hundred years, meaning that in the Western world, having these social cultural belief systems were basically imposed on peoples. And it was like you are either a man or a woman, and this is what you are. And that was sort of the prime example of a coupling. Fast forward to the 1950s, that sort of got even further reinforced by segregation of all sorts, department stores, labor, gender expression, so the connection there is sort of, like you said earlier, it really is a social construct.
Mm-hmm.
And even if we go back to concepts of biology, there is sexual variation as well. There is not just male or female.
I teach developmental psychology. I teach at California State University, Channel Islands. And I put up this slide that shows a number of variations in sex chromosomes alone. So you can have, traditionally you would say that female would be XX and male would be XY, but you could be X missing a Y. You could be Y with two X's. You can be X with half a Y. There's all kinds of combinations that cause both internal structures when the baby develops, also external genitalia, also hormonal and brain development. And so you can be born, and then we label people based on only external genitalia when they come out. So you can be born with a penis and ovaries tucked inside.
Mm-hmm.
You can be born with a vagina and undescended testes. And then at puberty, something else could happen because of the hormonal variations that accompany the variations in sex chromosomes. And I think the general public is just starting to get an understanding of that.
Yes. And for me, it fills me with a lot of hope it fills me with an immense hope that people will begin to think about human beings in a more expansive way rather than in a way that is being taught. Because there are differences between sex assigned at birth, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation. There's lots of different ways people can identify, and it's more than just a spectrum.
And one does not predict the other.
Exactly.
This is the important thing. Just because you know somebody's gender doesn't mean you know their sexual orientation, right? So let's talk about this Gen Z and 1 in 5 in America identifying LGBTQ. Do you think they're actually more being born, or do you think they're just more free to be themselves?
So I definitely believe that the number of folks who could potentially feel a sense of belonging in the LGBTQIA 2 Spirit Plus community has...
That's a mouthful and it's long. Now, would you say that and break down every word instead of an acronym?
Yes. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, asex, I believe.
Asexual?
Asexual. Two-spirit is a identifier used in the Native Indigenous community, and plus is sort of a catch-all for a lot of other things that we don't typically talk about, but still very much present in the community.
Okay, so there are more people feeling safe in that community, did you say?
Yes, yes. And now I think a good catch-all term, which is a reclaimed word, is queer. I usually use that word pretty interchangeably, and I say queer community instead of the mouthful because I feel like it's more inclusive and there isn't, I guess, a necessity to have to label yourself either.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but queer encompasses them all.
Yeah.
Right? So therefore, just throwing this out there, if I happen to have been in college once and I happen to have experimented and had sex with women, even though I am cisgendered heterosexual as an adult, can I be queer?
I say yes. Absolutely.
So then I would say maybe 100% of adults in America. Okay, so you're saying that they're being more free. Let's talk about a particular population that is being highly politicized right now. And this is the population of trans kids. Now, at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, there's an entire department of doctors who are giving proper medical care to trans kids. I saw an interview with one doctor once, and she said, it's not that there are more trans people, but trans people are coming out earlier and earlier.
Yes.
But this comes the controversy, right? Because some people worry that administering puberty blockers or hormones to very young children when the child might be gay, might be experimenting with all kinds of identity formation. You're a psychologist. Tell me about this process of forming an identity and how early does it start?
Honestly, it can start very, very young. I mean, I've spoken with folks that have been able to identify differences in their sexual preferences and how they feel in their bodies as early as 5. So it could really go way far back. And I think maybe the concerns here and worries that I hear and that you're speaking to are valid. However, if we look at gender and sexuality, again, on a spectrum or as in a constellation, really, is that things can be fluid and they change over time sometimes. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes people are very sure about what they feel like in their bodies. But in terms of physical autonomy, I think that if a person is able to speak and say things, you should believe them in what they feel.
But what about those who say the medical intervention is too early? Because you mentioned it's fluid. You mentioned things change. I'm going to tell you a story. When my youngest daughter was 3, we were living in Italy. I have no idea why, but one morning she woke up and said, "Call me Ryan. My name is Ryan," and would only wear boy clothes. And so for 2 weeks, we called her Ryan, and she wore her blue and brown clothes that she happened to own already. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks into it, she just said, "That's not my name. I'm a girl now." And it was just sort of like how a 3-year-old would just experiment. Now, what if I said, "Oh, I have a trans daughter. And I literally helped, you know how mothers and children are like one heart and one soul. And what if I influenced her gender identity?
That's an interesting way to put it, because I feel like children are already influenced from the moment that they are born. People are assigned a specific gender from the moment they are born. So I can argue the same back from the way that things are set up in society to begin with. So maybe we need to be more, I guess, open about differences from an early age. And could it actually be harmful to, I guess, ascribe or say you are a woman and you are a man when a kid doesn't feel that way?
Right. Did I do the right thing by calling her Ryan?
Yes, absolutely. You were encouraging and being supportive. And then, when they didn't feel like that anymore, then it was okay. It wasn't.
And, there was another week where she was a duck, by the way. So
love that.
That's what they do at that age. So what do you say to the people out there who are nervous about the medical interventions, puberty blockers specifically, and hormone treatments done? They don't do surgery on kids before the age of 18. What do you say to those people who are worried?
I would say I think that there is a big community out there that is also maybe potentially worried or concerned, and there are support groups, and there are people who have so much training and experience in being able to support those folks who are feeling that way, and can carry them in a sense of community to what might be supportive for both the parent and the child at the same time. So I guess what I want to say is you're not alone.
Mm-hmm. I think that we are heading toward or back towards something that's evolutionarily more natural for our species. That there wasn't this hard and fast gender divide, and that people could be humans. And if you look at some of our closest ancestors, the bonobos, they make love, not war, and they have same-sex relationships all the time as an exchange of service and care and sometimes bonding. And I think that we're getting to a place where you can just be who you are. And definitely Gen Z seems to have figured this out.
Yes.
When we come back, we're going to take a break. I want to talk about, in your practice, seeing LGBTQ youth and adults and their mental health. And really, I got to ask the question, how far have we come in the mental health area? You are listening to Mating Matters. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. We'll be back after this. The Dr. Wendy Walsh Show on KFI AM 640 Los Angeles every Sunday from 4 to 7 p.m., where we talk about everything in relationships, the good, the bad, the ugly, the smart. Whether you are looking for a relationship, whether you're looking to keep a mate, whether you're looking to recover after you've lost a mate, I have the science of love for you. You can download the iHeartRadio app and listen to the Dr. Wendy Walsh Show anytime. You can also hear it live every Sunday from 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific Time on KFI AM 640. Welcome back to Mating Matters Podcast. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. My guest today, Dr. Leslie Solis, who is a Latinx bilingual licensed clinical psychologist in Los Angeles and co-host of the podcast, My Therapist Friends. I want to talk about dating, gay dating. Because I get questions, Dr. Solis, all the time. People write to me, and here's one of the biggest questions I get. Who pays for a date? Because someone told me a story recently that he went on a date with a guy who asked him out. They had dinner. The check came. The guy who did the asking paid for the date. The guy who was invited said, "I'll get the next one." And later, he got some angry texts from his host saying, "I just think it was so rude that you didn't offer to split the check." What's the rule?
So I definitely think that there are no rules, especially if we're trying to stay away from heteronormative standards, because those obviously do not apply in the queer community and queer dating. Um, Oftentimes, the thing that I feel like comes up in situations where we're talking about dating is that these conversations are kind of had beforehand. There's more inquiry about what your beliefs are around dating so that when you actually get there, you don't have to guess, or you can just kind of ask in the moment.
Right. So could he have said, so he meets this guy. The guy says, oh, do you want to get dinner at so-and-so restaurant? What's the response? Sure. Should we plan on doing Dutch, or are you inviting me to treat me? Like, you have to ask that awkward question?
No, not necessarily. I think those that doesn't have to happen in the moment. I think as you're leading up to the date, you can start kind of asking about, oh, what are your thoughts about, payment, or what are your thoughts about what kinds of activities are had, or do you like to have drinks, or what kinds of things do you want to do together? Though that sort of opens up the conversation a little bit more so that it doesn't end up where somebody had some idea or didn't. But even if you get hit with that, I think it's okay for you to say, I had no idea. I was going to pick up the check later. I had said that.
Right. And that's what I told him to say. I said, just say, I told you I'd get the next one. It means I liked you and I want to see you again.
Yes, exactly.
But this stuff bleeds into heterosexual relationships too, because again, we're at a time where so many women are surging ahead economically. And so some of the men that they want to date are making less money. So there is even this question in heterosexual relationships about who pays. But listen to this story. Someone told me recently that they went on a date with a guy. It was lovely, heterosexual relationship. He paid for the date. Afterwards, because it was a first date and she didn't feel comfortable, she did not have sex with him. And later he texted her and said, you need to Venmo me for half of that dinner because you didn't have sex with me. Can you imagine? Like, the expectation was, I will feed you if you will feed me. In your way. She's shaking her head. I know you can't hear that on the radio, but she is shaking her head.
I'm furious.
She's furious. Okay, let me ask you this. In gay relationships, since there are no, you're open to creating your own gender roles any way you want, which gives you a kind of freedom. But when it comes to asking someone out on a date, are there any rules there, or can anyone do it?
I think it really just depends on your personality. If you are someone that is more extroverted and loves to be the person to court, perfect. If you are someone that likes the chase, perfect. There's couplings of all kinds for everybody. And it really just, I think, at the end of the day, depends on personality.
How much does attachment style play into this?
Oh, gosh, a lot, a lot, right? And I think that you could very much say someone who is maybe a little bit more anxious may want to make that first move, or someone who maybe is a little more avoidant will like the chase.
Yeah, we'll sit back and be chased.
Yes.
That's what I think. I think no matter, what your sexual orientation, attachment style plays into it.
Absolutely.
I know if I were gay, I would be the asker. I would be the chaser. Because I don't think about that in terms of attachment style. I think of it in terms of extroversion.
Yes.
Right? The extrovert is happy to pick up the phone.
Yes.
Let's just find out what's happening. Let's talk about how gay couples start to form their gender roles within the relationship. What are the big topics that come up? And when should you address some of these topics about gender roles?
I think it's important I think it starts with you as a person, right? Your sexuality and your gender are yours to define. And once you are clear about what that is, then you can invite the other person to have that conversation with you and show up in that conversation rather than it just being some expectation that you were fed when you were 5, right? It's something a lot more conscious.
Or even if you have ambivalence, then it gets more confusing. I use that example with, say, parenting a small child. When the parent is a little bit ambivalent about a rule, the kid will sense it and pick it up and work the parent harder, right? I remember when I had a small child and I was breastfeeding, and I took a job in San Francisco where I was commuting. And I knew that I was going to breastfeed for 3 years no matter what. And I knew that I'd be gone, 20 hours or something to do this job, and I could only pump so much. So I put in my contract that if they ever needed me overnight for more than 20 hours, that they had to buy a plane ticket for a nanny and a lap baby. And people were like, "You put that in your employment contract?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because I was so clear inside myself. I would have said no to the job if I would have had to do premature weaning." So that was like something important that I had to have. So the same goes with, I think, our gender roles. If we know that there are certain things that we like to do, certain things we don't like to do, and we're very clear within ourselves, it's easier to communicate that with a partner.
Absolutely.
Now, there's also research to show that heterosexual couples could have much happier relationships if they learn to be a little more gay. And what I mean by that is that their division of labor is more flexible and open, that heterosexual couples often hurt their relationship by falling into traditional gender roles that belonged in the 1950s when a woman was home all day, and now she works all day and she's still supposed to do the 1950s housewife, or still does the bulk of the childcare, the bulk of the domestic responsibility. So do you have any advice for any couple, heterosexual or gay, when they're having this conversation?
Well, the thing that screams at me is internalized misogyny. So these are things that I think are important to have a conversation about, right? Just like I was saying earlier, you need to know where you stand on that. And then you can say, hey, I want this to be more equal, which tends to be something that I think is pretty common in the gay community.
Yeah, that's what we can learn from. I have a boyfriend now who does laundry, who loves to do the dishes, and I'm in a happier relationship than ever. And I will say this, it was very difficult for me to let him do these things because if you can call it internalist misogyny, whatever, I call it, I was raised in patriarchy, it swims in my head. And so I was just like, oh, this man is getting up to do dishes. It feels unmasculine. And then I had to question that in my head. Like how, why? Where did I get that idea? I want to sit and finish my glass of wine and let him do the dishes. And so we are actually happier with a greater division, a better balance, I think, equality in those relationships. So I think we can all learn from that. I was talking to a gay friend the other day, and I was, giving this, your childhood must have been so awful. It must have been so hard. And he actually got very offended. And he was like, no, actually, I had really cool parents. The coming out was not a problem. I always had gay friends at school all the way through. So I realized we've come a long way. But have we come far enough? In your practice, obviously you see everybody, but also inclusive of the LGBT community. Do you think things have changed for many youth?
I would say they have. I believe that people feel more comfortable talking about themselves and their identity development, thankfully, because of the immense work that queer, trans people, indigenous people of color have done for the community. So there's also technology. Lots of people are finding community with one another and being less alone and feeling more courageous.
Mm-hmm. How many queer people do you think are well-adjusted who didn't suffer discrimination?
So it truly warms my heart that more and more people are feeling well-adjusted, are being supported by their neighboring communities, by their loved ones. It really gives me that there a hope for and possibility for the future on a micro level. On a macro level, I'm curious about the folks that are providing this feedback. Are these folks, do they have social, geographic, and economic privilege, for example? Because the experience of a queer, undocumented, darker-skinned, gender nonconforming person will absolutely be different from a queer, documented, white, cisgendered appearing and identified person. So with that being said, it's hard to really know what percentage of people truly feel accepted by their communities when we really zoom out and look at the society as a whole, because as much as a person may feel accepted by their loved ones and community on a micro level, they still have to interface with a society from a political standpoint that does not fully accept them.
Exactly. So this person is white and wealthy.
Yes.
And I didn't even know he was gay until he told me. So cisgendered appearing, right? Or what'd you say? Heterosexual appearing or cisgendered, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, he would be from a place of privilege. And you know what? Congratulations that those people exist. But we have to open up our hearts to understand that other people walk out in a world where they can't pass, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. But when they do present with mental health issues, what are the main symptoms?
So everyone definitely has their own unique individual story. Some common themes in the stories that I've heard in my personal practice include relationship challenges, shame, loneliness, body image issues, substance abuse, depression, various kinds of trauma, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. I think it's also important to note that those are things that a lot of people outside of the community also struggle with. So people in the queer community don't always seek services exclusively because of their sexual or gender identity, me being the cause of those struggles. Now, in cases where there is a clear connection between identity and mental health risk, I think it's also important for our audience to know that identity is often a source of joy for folks.
Mm-hmm.
It's the homophobia and the discrimination that tends to be the issue.
Exactly. Is it being decreased at all, the homophobia out there?
I would say it kind of depends where you live.
Yeah.
Geographic location.
Very zip code dependent, isn't it?
Very much so.
Yeah. I remember years ago I was doing a TV show and the audio guy, no, it wasn't the audio guy. He was one of the, he wasn't working in tech, but he was doing something like a grip on the set. And he came up to me and he said something about his body language. He was from a small town in the South, and we'd worked together for a few weeks. And he leaned in to say something. I could tell it was going to be personal. I took my finger and covered my little lavalier mic so quick as he said to me, I'm going to practice coming out with you. I want to tell you I'm gay. And I said, well, welcome to the world where we just are people. And I gave him a hug. And I thought, how did I know to cover my mic? Because it would have gone into every guy's headset on the entire set. I was like, oh my gosh. But he came from a place where I'm sure that was a very big event. Whereas if you're from a big urban center, probably happens middle school, high school even, right? Not this gentleman was like 30.
Yeah.
Last week, I did a segment on things to not say to a trans person. From your experience with patients, what are some of the biggest microaggressions?
Gosh, this could be its own podcast episode on its own.
But
I will try my very best to condense these. You don't look like someone who was born blank.
Yeah.
You don't look like someone who is blank. Assuming someone's pronouns and refusing to use preferred pronouns, dead naming, statements like gender and sexual fluidity is a trend, asking about who is a husband or wife or who wears the pants in a queer relationship, confusing rhetoric that being in the queer community is no big deal, but also stop flaunting it in front of my face, lack of representation in just about everything from media all the way down to brochures in the doctor's office. Referring to being LGBTQ as a choice or lifestyle, invasive questions about anatomy transitions, or...
Yeah, I like to say it's nobody's business what is under your clothes except the person you're about to make love with, right? That's the conversation.
Yes. And also, how does sex happen in these kinds of relationships, which, of course, is also a big no-no. Also, space that is taken up by non-queer folks in queer spaces is also a big one that I think is hard to miss. So things like Pride or bars that are for, or spaces that are for queer folks which doesn't mean that folks that are not part of the community shouldn't participate in, but also be very conscientious and mindful that these spaces were created for folks that can't be themselves in other spaces. So that's another one.
Well, I want to interrupt and just say this. So when I was a young, hottie partying girl and just wanted to go out and dance, we always went to gay clubs because it was safe for us. We went because we weren't hounded by guys and we could just go and dance. So was I stealing that safe space?
So the feedback that I've been getting, or at least other queer folks, is that that is a common understanding. I think that femmes who are straight or whatever they identify as may fill these spaces because of safety reasons. But I've noticed, at least in this neck of the woods in West Hollywood, that the times that I have gone to these places, there are also lurkers and straight men that are also there because they know that straight women go to these spaces. So,
So it opens the door
yes.
and trails in those guys.
Yes.
Oh, fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about relationships. Any particular challenges, any ways that same-sex couples can support each other?
Gosh, this is such a loaded question because I think it kind of depends on where each person, depending on their relationship constellation, whether they are in a monogamous relationship or not. I think it depends on their stage in their identity development too.
Here's one question I get a lot. People write to me and say, my partner, I'm out, my family loves me, they love my partner's still in the closet. So when we go home to visit his family, we have to pretend to be just friends.
Yes.
What would you say to that person?
So I would say to that person that it is important to take care of yourself and have your community and people around you that can support you through that as you are supporting your partner. I know that there are some people that find that they cannot do that. So I think it's important to understand your boundaries as well. If that is something that you don't feel comfortable with, then you don't have to participate in. But that if you do, that you have the community around you to support you through that. And
Right.
that goes both ways.
Because to have to pretend to be something you're not is really, really difficult. If your Gen Z or Y child comes out to you and you're a parent, what's the best thing to say?
That you love them. Do not say that you love them no matter what.
Right.
Because
then it adds like a little condition to it, right?
of course. And so of course you
Like,
do.
I love you even though.
So I would encourage you as a parent to say something like, everything I learn about you makes me love you more. I love finding out about who you are, and I'm excited about how the world, is going to understand and experience you. So at the end of it, I would suggest that the only emotion you need to express to your child in that moment is joy.
Oh, that's so well said. Dr. Leslie Solis, you can find her online. Is it drlesliesolis.com?
Yes.
That's easy. And check out her podcast, which is called My Therapist Friend. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Mating Matters. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. We'll see you next time.